I stood in my empty office watching my son Daniel and daughter-in-law Ashley box up my personal belongings. 35 years building Morrison Construction from nothing, and now they were calling me dead weight and useless. Ashley smirked as she slid the company ownership papers across my desk, everything transferred to their names. Daniel would not even make eye contact. My hands shook as I signed away my life's work. I walked out without a word, leaving behind the business that made them millionaires. 3 days later, my phone exploded with 97 missed calls. The drive home to my modest ranch house felt like a funeral procession. Every turn reminded me of properties I had built, families I had helped, dreams I had made real with these weathered hands. Morrison Construction started in 1988 with nothing but a pickup truck, 2 hammers, and a promise to my late wife Martha that we would build something lasting together. Those early years were brutal. We started with small residential renovations, fixing porches and replacing roofs for families who trusted a young couple with more determination than experience. Martha handled the books and client relationships, while I learned every trade from plumbing to electrical work. We worked 16-hour days, saved every penny, and slowly built our reputation one satisfied customer at a time. By the mid-90s, we had expanded into commercial projects. Our first major contract was a small office building for a local insurance company. I remember the sleepless nights, double-checking every measurement, every permit, every safety protocol. When we finished that project on time and under budget, word spread through the business community like wildfire. The 2000s brought exponential growth. We were handling major commercial projects across 3 states, employing over 60 people, and generating millions in annual revenue. Martha was the heart of our client relationships. She remembered every client's birthday, their children's names, their family struggles. When Martha died from cancer 2 years ago, she took with her the emotional center of everything we had built. After her death, I struggled with profound loneliness. The house felt empty, the business felt mechanical without her warmth, and I found myself depending more heavily on Daniel. He had joined the company 5 years earlier after graduating with a business degree from State University. At first, I was thrilled to have my son by my side, carrying on the family legacy. The gradual takeover began 3 years ago, when Daniel convinced me to make him an equal partner. At the time, it seemed natural. He was young, energetic, and full of modern business ideas. I was approaching 70. My arthritis was making construction sites more challenging, and I thought partnership would ease my transition toward retirement. Ashley entered our lives 18 months ago when Daniel married her. She came from a marketing background at a large corporation and immediately began pushing Daniel to modernize and streamline the business. She spoke in corporate buzzwords about efficiency, profit maximization, and eliminating redundancies. To Ashley, my personal relationships with clients were outdated sentimentality that hindered growth. The exclusion started gradually. Daniel and Ashley began holding strategy meetings without me, claiming they did not want to burden me with day-to-day operational details. Important client calls were redirected to Daniel. New contracts were negotiated without my input. When I questioned these changes, Ashley would smile condescendingly and suggest that perhaps it was time for me to enjoy a well-deserved retirement. My health became their weapon. When my doctor mentioned early signs of arthritis during a routine checkup, Ashley somehow obtained a copy of the medical report. She commissioned a psychological evaluation from a colleague, claiming I was cognitively declining and becoming a liability to the business. The evaluator, Dr. Patricia Rollins, spent exactly 45 minutes with me before concluding that my old-fashioned methods were incompatible with modern business practices. The final confrontation happened on a cold Tuesday morning in October. Ashley presented me with a folder containing the psychological evaluation, my medical records, and transfer papers that would remove me entirely from Morrison Construction. Daniel sat beside her, avoiding my eyes, nodding along with her presentation about protecting the business from my declining capabilities. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain I had ever experienced. This was my son, the boy I had taught to swing a hammer, taken to construction sites during school vacations, groomed to inherit everything I had built. Now he was choosing his wife's ambition over 35 years of shared blood, sweat, and dreams. As I cleared out my office that afternoon, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. On my old company phone, which they had forgotten to confiscate, I found emails between Daniel and Ashley dating back 18 months. They had been planning this takeover from the moment she joined our family. The emails detailed their strategy to gradually isolate me, document my declining health, and transfer ownership when I was most vulnerable. One email from Ashley to Daniel read, "Your father's emotional approach to business is costing us serious money. These personal relationships with clients are unnecessary overhead. Once we control the company, we can streamline operations and increase profit margins by at least 30%. We just need to be patient and document his incompetence." Daniel's response was even more devastating. "I know Dad built this company, but Ashley is right about modernizing. Maybe it is time for him to step aside. We can handle this business better than he can." Reading those words felt like watching my son die. The Daniel I raised would never have written such callous dismissal of everything I had taught him about business, family, and loyalty. Ashley had poisoned him against me so thoroughly that he could not see what he was destroying. I sat in my truck outside the Morrison Construction offices for the last time, watching employees who had worked for me for decades loading their tools into Daniel's direction. None of them knew yet what had happened. Tomorrow, they would report to work and discover that Reid Morrison was no longer their boss. Some of them had been with me since the early days, men and women who trusted me with their livelihoods and their families' futures. The weight of that responsibility had always motivated me to build something stable and enduring. Now Daniel and Ashley would inherit not just a business, but the obligation to care for all those families. I wondered if they understood the depth of that responsibility, or if they saw employees as just another expense to be optimized. What Daniel and Ashley did not understand was that Morrison Construction was much more complex than the financial statements suggested. Over 35 years, I had built relationships that extended far beyond simple contractor agreements. Unknown to them, I maintained separate relationships with 3 major clients, who specifically requested that only I handle their accounts. These relationships were built on personal trust that spanned decades. William Hayes, CEO of Hayes Development Corporation, had been my client for 23 years. I first met him when his company was struggling with a problematic contractor who had abandoned a commercial project halfway through construction. I stepped in, finished the work at cost, and saved his company from bankruptcy. Since then, Hayes Development had given Morrison Construction over $40 million in contracts. But my relationship with William went deeper than business. When his daughter Sarah was diagnosed with leukemia 12 years ago, I organized a company-wide fundraising effort that raised $60,000 for her treatment. When his mother needed emergency home modifications after a stroke, I had a crew at her house within 4 hours, working through the weekend at no charge. When Sarah got married last spring, Martha and I were invited guests at her wedding. The Miller Family Trust represented my second crucial relationship. Patriarch James Miller inherited a construction empire from his father, but knew nothing about the actual building trades. Over 15 years, I had become his trusted advisor on all construction-related decisions. The trust controlled shopping centers, office buildings, and residential developments worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Miller trusted my judgment completely, often approving projects based solely on my recommendation. I had guided the Miller family through several financial crises, including the 2008 recession when many construction companies went bankrupt. I restructured their projects to minimize losses and keep their developments profitable. During James Miller's bitter divorce 3 years ago, I testified as a character witness about his commitment to quality construction and ethical business practices. My third major relationship was with Riverside Municipal Authority, represented by Director Margaret Thompson. Over 20 years, Morrison Construction had become the preferred contractor for all major infrastructure projects in Riverside County. This relationship began when I donated labor and materials to rebuild the community center after a devastating fire. Since then, we had built schools, fire stations, water treatment facilities, and highway improvements worth over $50 million. Margaret Thompson trusted me with projects that other contractors could not handle. When the elementary school roof collapsed during a winter storm, I had crews working around the clock to create temporary classrooms and repair the damage before students missed more than 3 days of school. When budget constraints threatened to cancel a new fire station, I found ways to reduce costs without compromising safety or quality. These relationships existed because of personal connections that could not be transferred to Daniel and Ashley. My clients did not just hire Morrison Construction, they hired Reid Morrison personally. They trusted my judgment, valued my integrity, and depended on my personal commitment to their success. After Martha's funeral, I had spent long evenings at her grave, remembering her advice about maintaining insurance policies in business. She had been more strategic than anyone realized, helping me create a complex legal structure where certain aspects of the business remained solely in my name. Martha understood that personal relationships were our most valuable assets and needed protection from potential future complications. Over the years, I had tried repeatedly to teach Daniel the relationship side of our business. I invited him to client dinners, family celebrations, and community events where real business connections were built. But Daniel was always more interested in profit margins than personal connections. He would check his phone during client conversations, cut short social interactions to discuss financial details, and treat client entertainment as unnecessary overhead. Ashley was even worse. She viewed client relationships as inefficient sentimentality that prevented maximum profit extraction. She believed that modern digital marketing and competitive pricing could replace decades of personal trust. To her, business was purely transactional, and emotional connections were weaknesses to be eliminated. Neither of them understood that construction is ultimately about trust. Clients hire contractors to enter their most personal spaces, to build structures where their families will live and work, to handle projects worth more money than most people earn in a lifetime. This level of trust cannot be established through marketing campaigns or competitive bidding. It requires years of demonstrated integrity, competence, and genuine care for the client's success. As I sat in my empty house that first evening after leaving the company, my phone rang. William Hayes was calling, frustrated and confused. Daniel and Ashley had contacted him about renegotiating existing contracts, claiming that new management required updated terms and pricing. Hayes was furious. "Reid, what the hell is going on over there? Some woman named Ashley called me talking about maximizing value and optimizing our partnership agreement. I told her I have a partnership with you, not with some corporate consultant who does not know the difference between a 2x4 and a 4x8 sheet of plywood. If you are not handling my account personally, I am taking my business elsewhere." I explained what had happened, keeping my voice steady despite the emotional turmoil. Hayes was quiet for a long moment before responding with genuine anger. "Those ungrateful idiots have no idea what they just threw away. You built that company into something special, and they are about to destroy it through pure greed and stupidity. Do not worry about me, Reid. Whatever you decide to do next, Hayes Development will follow you." That phone call was the first indication that Daniel and Ashley had seriously miscalculated. They assumed that Morrison Construction's success was based on the company name and reputation, rather than my personal relationships with key clients. They were about to discover how wrong they were. The next morning, Daniel and Ashley celebrated their victory with an expensive breakfast at the Riverside Country Club. They had calculated that Morrison Construction was worth $4.2 million and were already planning aggressive expansion into new markets. Ashley had spreadsheets showing projected revenue increases of 30 to 40% once they eliminated what she called Reid's inefficient personal service model. Their celebration was interrupted by a frantic phone call from Barbara Chen, the company's longtime accountant. Barbara had been trying to reach me about quarterly tax filings and discovered that I had been removed from all company accounts overnight. She was calling Daniel because she could not access certain financial records that were linked specifically to my personal contractor licenses and certifications. "Daniel, I need Reid's signature on these tax documents, and I cannot find half the account information I need. There are 3 major contracts that seem to be structured differently from our standard agreements. The paperwork is incomplete without Reid's personal authorization. Daniel dismissed her concerns, explaining that he and Ashley were now running the company and could handle any necessary signatures. Barbara tried to explain that certain contracts required specific personal guarantees and certifications, but Daniel cut her off. He was too busy planning their new corporate strategy to worry about paperwork complications. Their confidence lasted exactly 4 hours. At 1:15 in the afternoon, William Hayes called the main office demanding to speak with Reid Morrison immediately. The receptionist, confused by the sudden management change, transferred the call to Daniel. Hayes did not waste time with pleasantries. "Where is Reid Morrison?" "I was told he no longer works there, which is impossible because I have a $15 million project that requires his personal supervision. Put him on the phone right now." Daniel tried to explain that he was now running all client accounts and could provide the same level of service his father had delivered. Hayes exploded. "Son, I have been working with your father for 23 years. I do not know you, I do not trust you, and I am not about to hand over a $15 million project to someone who thinks he can replace Reid Morrison with a business degree and a bad attitude. Get Reid on the phone, or I terminate this contract immediately." Daniel stammered that I was no longer with the company and suggested scheduling a meeting to discuss the transition. Hayes hung up without another word. Within 2 hours, similar calls came from James Miller and Margaret Thompson. Both clients delivered the same message. They worked with Reid Morrison personally, not with Morrison Construction as a corporate entity. Without my direct involvement, they would terminate their contracts and seek other contractors. Ashley's face went white as she calculated the financial implications. The Hayes development project alone represented $15 million in revenue over 18 months. The Miller Family Trust had $12 million worth of projects in various stages of planning and construction. Riverside Municipal Authority had contracted for $16 million in infrastructure improvements over the next 2 years. Combined, these 3 client relationships represented $43 million in contracted work, plus an estimated $20 million in future projects. Ashley's spreadsheets, showing 30% profit increases, suddenly looked like fantasy. But the financial crisis was just beginning. Barbara called again, this time with genuine panic in her voice. She had discovered that while Daniel and Ashley owned Morrison Construction as a corporate entity, many of the company's most important assets remained in my personal name. My personal contractor licenses were required for all current projects. My bonding and insurance certifications guaranteed the company's ability to secure major contracts. Most critically, my personal reputation and relationships were legally inseparable from specific client agreements. Without my continued involvement, Morrison Construction could not legally continue work on existing projects. Daniel drove to my house repeatedly throughout the afternoon, but I was not there. I had driven to Martha's grave to think through my options and decide how to handle this crisis. By the time I returned home that evening, Daniel had left 17 increasingly desperate voicemail messages. The legal complications were worse than Ashley had imagined. Morrison Construction's corporate structure was built around my personal certifications and relationships. While they owned the company name and physical assets, they could not operate the business without my continued participation. At 5:30 in the evening, Ashley received a certified letter from William Hayes' attorney. The legal language was clear and devastating. If Reid Morrison did not personally confirm continuity of service within 72 hours, Hayes Development would terminate their contract and demand immediate return of the $2.3 million advance payment they had provided for materials and initial construction phases. Similar letters arrived by emergency courier from the Miller Family Trust and Riverside Municipal Authority. Each letter demanded my personal confirmation of continued service and threatened immediate contract termination with full financial penalties if I did not respond within 72 hours. Ashley called their business attorney, Frank Rodriguez, who had handled the ownership transfer. Rodriguez reviewed the client contracts and delivered devastating news. The agreements were structured as personal service contracts with Reid Morrison, not corporate agreements with Morrison Construction. This structure provided clients with extraordinary protection against contractor changes, but left Daniel and Ashley with no legal recourse. You own the company, but the most valuable contracts belong to Reid personally. Without his cooperation, you cannot fulfill these agreements. If the clients terminate for cause, you will owe approximately $4.1 million in returned advance payments, plus potential damages for project delays. Daniel spent that evening driving frantically around town, searching for me at every location he could remember from his childhood. He checked Martha's grave, my favorite diner, the old warehouse where we stored equipment, even the high school where I had coached his baseball team 15 years earlier. I was not hiding. I had checked into a modest hotel in the neighboring town of Millfield, registering under my own name and making no effort to conceal my location. I needed time to think clearly about my next steps, without the emotional complications of being in familiar surroundings. That first night away from home, I realized that Daniel and Ashley had made a fundamental miscalculation. They assumed that business relationships could be transferred like corporate assets, that clients would continue working with Morrison Construction regardless of who was running the company. They had no understanding of the personal trust that formed the foundation of our most valuable client relationships. More importantly, they had underestimated my strategic planning. Over 35 years of business, I had learned to prepare for every possible scenario. Martha and I had structured our affairs to protect both the business and our family from potential future complications. What Daniel and Ashley saw as an easy takeover was actually a carefully protected legacy that could not be stolen through paperwork and corporate maneuvering. As I lay in that hotel bed, listening to my phone buzz with call after call from Daniel, I felt a mixture of sadness and grim satisfaction. I was sad that my relationship with my son had deteriorated to this point, that Ashley's greed had poisoned him against everything I had taught him about family and business ethics. But I was also satisfied that 35 years of careful planning was about to teach them both a lesson about respect, loyalty, and the true foundations of business success. Day 2 of the crisis began, with Daniel and Ashley sitting in Frank Rodriguez's law office at 7 in the morning, desperate for legal solutions to their growing catastrophe. Rodriguez had spent the night reviewing Morrison Construction's corporate structure and delivered news that shattered their remaining confidence. Reid Morrison created what we call a personal services corporation structure. His individual reputation and professional relationships are legally inseparable from specific contracts. This is actually brilliant legal planning that protects both the business and the clients from exactly the kind of hostile takeover you just attempted. Ashley slammed her hand on Rodriguez's desk. That is impossible. We own the company. We have the signed transfer papers. How can he control contracts that belong to Morrison Construction? Rodriguez pulled out a thick folder of legal documents that I had filed over the years with Martha's help. Reid established these protections gradually over 3 decades. Key contracts require his personal performance, not just corporate performance. His licensing, bonding, and certifications are individual assets that cannot be transferred without his consent. Even if you own the corporate shell, you cannot operate the business without his cooperation. The financial reality was even worse than they had feared. Barbara arrived at Rodriguez's office with a complete analysis of Morrison Construction's financial obligations. Without the 3 major client relationships, the company would lose $6.8 million in projected revenue over the next 18 months. More devastating, they would need to immediately return $4.1 million in advance payments that had already been spent on equipment, materials, and wages. The company's current liquid assets totaled only $1.7 million, leaving them $2.4 million short of meeting their immediate obligations. Where did the advance money go? Ashley demanded, as if Barbara was responsible for the financial crisis. Barbara pulled out detailed spending records. Reid used advance payments exactly as intended: specialized equipment for the Hayes project, materials for the Miller Trust developments, and payroll advances for crews working on municipal projects. This is standard practice and completely legitimate. The problem is not mismanagement. The problem is that you cannot fulfill the contracts without Reid's personal involvement. Ashley's facade of corporate competence cracked completely. She screamed at Barbara, then at Rodriguez, then at Daniel, demanding solutions that did not exist. Her carefully constructed plans for maximizing profit and eliminating inefficiencies were collapsing into financial disaster. Daniel was experiencing a different kind of crisis. For the first time since Ashley had entered his life, he was seeing the manipulative and unstable personality that she had hidden behind corporate professionalism. Her response to adversity revealed a character that was completely foreign to everything Reid had taught him about handling pressure with dignity and integrity. Meanwhile, their problems were multiplying beyond client contracts. Chuck Bradley, the company's senior foreman and a 20-year veteran of Morrison Construction, arrived at the office with devastating news. The construction crews, many of whom had worked with me for over a decade, were refusing to report to Daniel. Reid Morrison is like a father to most of these guys, Chuck explained. He helped Jimmy Rodriguez buy his first house, loaned money to Pete Sullivan when his wife had cancer, paid for Tony Martinez's kid to go to college. These men do not work for Morrison Construction. They work for Reid Morrison personally. Without him, you have no crew. Ashley's response to this news revealed the depth of her misunderstanding about human relationships in business. We can hire new workers. Construction labor is replaceable. We do not need Reid's emotional attachment slowing down our efficiency. Chuck stared at her with disgust. Lady, you have no idea what you are talking about. Reid trained most of these guys from apprentices to master craftsmen. They are not just employees, they are family. You cannot replace 30 years of loyalty and expertise with want ads and competitive wages. The morning brought additional complications that Ashley had never considered. Morrison Construction's business credit line required my personal guarantee and signature for annual renewal. The credit line provided $3 million in operational cash flow that was essential for meeting payroll and purchasing materials. First National Bank called at 9:15, requesting my signature on renewal documents. When Daniel explained that I was no longer with the company, the bank immediately suspended the credit line pending a new financial review and personal guarantee from him. Without the credit line, Morrison Construction could not pay its 63 employees or purchase materials for current projects. The company was facing immediate insolvency through a series of financial dominoes that Ashley had never anticipated. By noon, Daniel was driving frantically around the area, searching for me at every location he could remember. He checked with old family friends, former employees, even my doctor's office, desperate to find me before the 72-hour deadline expired. His desperation was complicated by growing realization that Ashley had manipulated him into betraying everything Reid had taught him about family, loyalty, and business ethics. The woman he had married was revealing herself to be someone completely different from the professional, competent partner he thought he knew. Ashley was experiencing her own crisis of character. Her background research on Morrison Construction had focused entirely on financial statements and corporate assets. She had never investigated the personal relationships and legal structures that made the business actually function. Her corporate consulting experience had not prepared her for a family business built on 3 decades of personal trust and individual relationships. The private investigator she hired found me easily at the Millfield Inn, but I refused to meet with him or respond to messages. I was not hiding. I was simply choosing not to engage with people who had treated me with such disrespect and betrayal. At 3 in the afternoon, Daniel received the call that destroyed his remaining hope. William Hayes's attorney delivered an ultimatum. Reid Morrison must appear in person at Hayes Development offices by 5 o'clock the following day, or the $15 million contract would be terminated immediately with full financial penalties. Similar ultimatums arrived from the Miller Family Trust and Riverside Municipal Authority. All 3 clients had lost patience with excuses and delays. They wanted confirmation that Reid Morrison would personally oversee their projects, or they would find contractors who could provide that guarantee. Daniel's phone calls to me throughout the day became increasingly desperate. His first messages were angry and demanding, insisting that I had an obligation to help save the business. As the hours passed, and the severity of the crisis became clear, his tone shifted to pleading, and eventually to barely controlled panic. By evening, Daniel and Ashley had calculated their total financial exposure at $8.7 million in lost contracts, returned payments, and potential damages. Morrison Construction, a company I had built over 35 years, was facing complete bankruptcy within 72 hours of my departure. Ashley's final desperate move revealed the depth of her financial desperation. She admitted to Daniel that she had significant personal debts that she had hidden throughout their relationship. She had pressured him to remove Reid from the business specifically so she could access company assets to cover her own financial problems. "I owe some people money, Daniel. Serious people who do not accept excuses or delays. I need access to company funds to solve my personal situation. That is why we had to get Reid out of the way quickly." For the first time, Daniel understood that Ashley's motivations had nothing to do with improving Morrison Construction or securing their future together. She had manipulated him into destroying his relationship with his father, purely to solve her own financial crisis. At 4:47 in the afternoon on day 3, as Daniel sat in his truck outside my hotel, his phone rang. I had finally decided to answer his call. My voice was calm and measured, devoid of the anger he expected or the desperation he hoped for. "Hello, Daniel. I understand you have been trying to reach me." The relief in his voice was palpable. "Dad, thank God. We need to talk. There have been some misunderstandings, some complications with the client contracts. Can we meet and work this out?" I paused for a long moment before responding. "I will meet with you at the Morrison Construction offices at 6 o'clock tonight. Come alone, Daniel. We have a great deal to discuss." Daniel agreed immediately, not understanding that I held every card in this negotiation and that the meeting would be entirely on my terms. Day 3 of the crisis began with complete financial panic. Daniel and Ashley had not slept, surviving on coffee and the desperate hope that they could somehow solve a problem that was growing worse by the hour. Their business bank had called at 6 in the morning, demanding my signature on multiple financial documents that were essential for continued operations. Morrison Construction's business accounts were frozen, pending proper authorization. Without access to company funds, they could not pay the 63 employees who were scheduled to receive paychecks that Friday. They could not purchase materials for ongoing projects. They could not even pay basic utilities and insurance premiums that kept the business legally operational. Ashley was experiencing a complete breakdown of her carefully constructed corporate persona. The woman who had confidently planned to maximize profits and eliminate inefficiencies was now screaming at bank representatives, threatening legal action against clients, and demanding that everyone solve problems that were entirely of her own creation. Daniel was witnessing this meltdown with growing horror. For 18 months, he had believed that Ashley was a sophisticated business professional who could modernize Morrison Construction and increase its profitability. Now he was seeing the manipulative, unstable, and desperate person she had hidden behind polished presentations and corporate buzzwords. The 97 phone calls began early that morning and continued throughout the day. Daniel called my hotel room, my cell phone, and even tried calling Martha's relatives, hoping someone could convince me to respond to the crisis. Each call went to voicemail, adding to his growing desperation. His messages evolved throughout the day, providing a clear audio record of his emotional journey from anger to panic to genuine remorse. The first calls were demanding and accusatory. "Dad, you are being unreasonable. We own this company now, and you have an obligation to help us transition the client relationships." By midday, the calls had become pleading. "Dad, please call me back. We can work this out. Maybe we moved too fast with the ownership change. We need to discuss how to handle these client contracts." The afternoon calls revealed genuine panic. "Dad, the whole company is falling apart. We are going to lose everything. Please, I am begging you to call me back. I do not know what to do." The final calls, late in the evening, showed the first signs of real remorse. "Dad, I think I made a terrible mistake, Ashley is not the person I thought she was. I should have listened to you. Please give me a chance to fix this." While Daniel was making his desperate calls, Ashley had hired a private investigator named Marcus Webb to locate me and, if necessary, apply pressure for my cooperation. Webb was a former police detective who specialized in corporate investigations and had a reputation for using aggressive tactics to achieve results. Webb found me at the Millfield Inn within 4 hours, but I refused to meet with him or acknowledge his presence. When he knocked on my hotel room door, I simply informed him through the closed door that I had no interest in speaking with anyone representing Daniel or Ashley. Webb reported back to Ashley that I was not hiding but was simply choosing not to engage. This news sent Ashley into another rage, as she could not understand why someone would not respond to pressure and threats. Meanwhile, the employee exodus was accelerating. Chuck Bradley had already submitted his resignation and was recruiting other senior workers to leave Morrison Construction. 5 of the most experienced crew members gave notice, explaining that their loyalty was to Reid Morrison personally, not to the corporate entity. "We have been talking, and we are starting our own company," Chuck explained to Daniel. "Reid Morrison taught us everything we know about construction and business ethics. We will not work for people who would betray him after everything he has done for this community." Ashley's response to losing key employees revealed her complete misunderstanding of human relationships in business. "Let them go. We can hire new workers at lower wages and without all the emotional baggage. This might actually improve our profit margins." Daniel was beginning to understand that Ashley viewed every human relationship as a financial transaction that could be optimized for maximum profit. The concept of loyalty, gratitude, or long-term relationship building was completely foreign to her corporate mindset. The bank crisis escalated throughout the day, as more financial institutions discovered that I was no longer associated with Morrison Construction. Our equipment financing company demanded my personal guarantee for lease renewals. Our insurance provider required my signature for policy continuation. Our surety bond company suspended coverage pending new financial guarantees. Each phone call brought news of another financial domino falling, creating a cascade of problems that threatened to destroy the business within days. Morrison Construction had been built over 35 years with my personal reputation and relationships as the foundation. Removing me from the equation had destabilized every aspect of the company's operations. By afternoon, Daniel was driving frantically through 3 counties, searching for me at locations connected to our family history. He checked the cemetery where Martha was buried, the high school where I had coached his baseball team, the community center where Morrison Construction had donated materials and labor for renovations. His search was complicated by growing realization that Ashley had systematically isolated him from everything Reid had taught him about family relationships and business ethics. She had convinced him that modern corporate practices were superior to old-fashioned personal relationships, that efficiency was more valuable than loyalty, that maximizing profit was more important than maintaining trust. At 4 in the afternoon, all 3 major clients delivered their final ultimatums. William Hayes, James Miller, and Margaret Thompson each sent certified letters demanding my personal appearance by 5 o'clock the following day. The letters were clear and uncompromising. Reid Morrison must confirm his personal involvement in their projects, or all contracts would be terminated immediately. The total financial exposure was now calculated at $8.7 million in lost contracts, returned payments, and potential damages. Morrison Construction, which had been valued at $4.2 million just 3 days earlier, was facing bankruptcy that would leave Daniel and Ashley owing over $4 million in personal debt. Ashley's desperation reached a breaking point when she realized that her personal financial problems were about to become much worse. She had hidden significant gambling debts from Daniel, owing over $200,000 to people who did not accept bankruptcy as an excuse for non-payment. Her plan to access Morrison Construction's assets to pay her personal debts was collapsing along with the company itself. Without access to company funds, she faced consequences that extended far beyond financial embarrassment. Daniel's final realization came when he discovered Ashley's hidden debts and the real motivation behind her push to remove Reid from the business. She had not been trying to improve Morrison Construction or secure their future together. She had been using him to gain access to company assets that could solve her personal financial crisis. The betrayal cut even deeper than his betrayal of Reid. Ashley had manipulated him into destroying his relationship with his father, his business inheritance, and his reputation in the community, all to cover her gambling debts and personal financial irresponsibility. At 4:47 in the afternoon, as Daniel sat in the parking lot of the Millfield Inn, contemplating the complete destruction of everything his father had built, his phone rang. My calm voice cut through his panic like a lifeline. "Hello, Daniel. I understand you have been trying to reach me." The relief in his voice was overwhelming. "Dad, thank God you answered. We need to talk. Everything is falling apart, and I do not know how to fix it." I listened to his desperation without interruption before responding. "I will meet with you at the Morrison Construction offices at 6 o'clock tonight. But I want you to understand something, Daniel. This meeting will be entirely on my terms. You and Ashley created this crisis through greed, disrespect, and poor judgment. If you want my help, you will listen to what I have to say without argument or interruption." Daniel agreed immediately, willing to accept any terms that might save the business and repair our relationship. He did not understand that I had spent 3 days carefully planning this confrontation and that the outcome had already been determined by their own actions. As Daniel drove back to Morrison Construction for our 6 o'clock meeting, he was about to discover that some mistakes cannot be undone, and that betraying family carries consequences that extend far beyond immediate financial loss. At exactly 6 o'clock that evening, I walked into the Morrison Construction offices for the first time since signing away my ownership 3 days earlier. I was dressed in my best suit, the same one I had worn to Martha's funeral and to every important business meeting for the past decade. My appearance was calm and professional, showing none of the emotional turmoil that Daniel and Ashley had been experiencing. I was not alone. Thomas Sullivan, Martha's brother and my attorney for over 20 years, accompanied me into the conference room. Behind him came Barbara Chen, carrying a thick folder of financial documents and legal papers. Daniel's surprise at seeing Barbara was immediate and telling. "Barbara, what are you doing here? You work for us now." Barbara looked at him with a mixture of pity and disappointment. "Daniel, I have been working with your father since before you graduated high school. My loyalty has always been to Reid Morrison, not to Morrison Construction as a corporate entity. I have been documenting the financial irregularities that Ashley has been creating for 18 months. Ashley's face went white at the mention of financial irregularities. She had assumed that her embezzlement scheme was too sophisticated for a small-town accountant to detect. She was about to discover how wrong she had been. Thomas Sullivan placed a digital recorder on the conference table and announced that our conversation would be recorded for legal purposes. Ashley objected, claiming that she had rights to privacy, but Sullivan explained that she was free to leave if she preferred not to participate in the discussion. However, Sullivan added with the cold precision of an experienced attorney, leaving now would constitute an admission of guilt regarding the criminal charges that will be filed tomorrow morning. Daniel looked confused and frightened by the mention of criminal charges. Ashley looked trapped and desperate, realizing that her carefully constructed manipulation was about to be exposed. I sat down across from Daniel, looking directly at my son for the first time since he had chosen Ashley's lies over 35 years of everything I had taught him about family, business, and integrity. "Daniel, before we discuss the future of Morrison Construction, we need to address the past 18 months of deception and theft that have brought us to this point. Barbara, please explain to Daniel what his wife has been doing with company funds." Barbara opened her folder and pulled out financial records that detailed a sophisticated embezzlement scheme. Ashley has been creating fake vendor accounts and submitting inflated expense reports for the past 18 months. The total amount stolen is $347,000. Daniel stared at Ashley in shock. "That is impossible. Ashley handles marketing expenses, not major financial transactions." Barbara continued with devastating precision. She created vendor accounts for non-existent marketing consultants, graphic designers, and advertising agencies. She submitted expense reports for business trips that never happened, client entertainment that never occurred, and office supplies that were never delivered. She was very careful to keep individual transactions small enough to avoid automatic auditing triggers. Ashley's response revealed the depth of her desperation and the calculating nature of her personality. Instead of denial or remorse, she immediately tried to shift blame and justify her actions. I was investing in the business modernization that Reid was too stubborn to approve. Those funds were used to develop marketing strategies and corporate consulting that would have increased profitability by millions of dollars. Thomas Sullivan pulled out a second set of documents that destroyed Ashley's explanation. We have bank records showing that the stolen funds were transferred to Ashley's personal accounts and used to pay gambling debts to casinos in Atlantic City and Las Vegas. This was not business investment. This was systematic theft to cover personal financial irresponsibility. Daniel's face showed the emotional devastation of discovering that his wife had not only manipulated him into betraying his father, but had also been stealing from the family business for over a year. The woman he had chosen over his father's wisdom was revealed to be a criminal who had been using him as a cover for her own illegal activities. Ashley's mask of corporate professionalism finally cracked completely. "You sanctimonious old fool. Your emotional approach to business was costing this company serious money. I could have modernized operations and increased profits by 40% if you had not been standing in the way with your outdated methods." My response was calm and measured, showing none of the anger that would have been justified. "Ashley, you misunderstood everything about Morrison Construction from the beginning. This business was never about maximizing short-term profits. It was about building something lasting, something that would provide security for families and contribute to the community for generations." I turned to Daniel, who was sitting in stunned silence as the full scope of his mistake became clear. "Daniel, 18 months ago you had a choice. You could have learned to build on what we had created together, or you could listen to someone who saw our business as nothing more than an opportunity for quick profit. You chose poorly." Thomas Sullivan presented Daniel with a formal ultimatum that I had prepared during my 3 days of careful planning. Reid is prepared to return as CEO of Morrison Construction under specific conditions. Ashley must be removed from the business entirely and will face criminal prosecution for embezzlement. Daniel will return to employee status and must earn back partnership through demonstrated competence and character. The alternative was complete business failure. Without my return, all major clients would terminate their contracts within 24 hours. Morrison Construction would declare bankruptcy, owing over $8 million to clients, suppliers, and employees. Daniel and Ashley would face personal liability for debts that would destroy their financial future for decades. Daniel looked at Ashley, then at me, clearly torn between his loyalty to his wife and his recognition that she had manipulated him into destroying everything his father had built. Ashley was staring at the evidence of her embezzlement, calculating whether she could talk her way out of criminal prosecution. "Daniel," I said quietly, "this is your last chance to choose between the woman who lied to you, stole from our business, and manipulated you into betraying your family, or the father who spent 35 years building something you could inherit with pride." Ashley made the decision for him. Her response revealed the manipulative, narcissistic personality that she had hidden throughout their relationship. "Daniel, do not let this old man guilt you into giving up everything we have worked for. We can fight this legally. We can start our own company. We do not need his permission to succeed." Daniel's response showed that he was finally seeing Ashley clearly for the first time. "Ashley, we did not work for anything. My father spent 35 years building Morrison Construction, and you convinced me to steal it from him. There is no we in this situation. There is just you manipulating me into destroying my own family." The final revelation came when Thomas Sullivan announced that I had been recording Ashley's financial activities for months. Martha's brother was not just my attorney. He was also a former federal prosecutor who understood how to build criminal cases against white-collar criminals. "Ashley, you are under investigation for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft. The evidence against you is overwhelming, and the district attorney will file charges tomorrow morning regardless of what Daniel decides about the business. Ashley's arrest was not my revenge. It was the natural consequence of her own criminal behavior. I had simply documented her actions and provided evidence to the appropriate authorities. As the meeting concluded, Daniel faced the most important decision of his adult life. He could accept my terms and attempt to rebuild our relationship while learning to run the business ethically, or he could stand by Ashley and face complete financial and personal destruction. The choice revealed everything about his character and his understanding of what truly mattered in life. Daniel's decision came without hesitation. He looked at Ashley with a mixture of anger and profound sadness, then turned to me with tears in his eyes. "Dad, I choose you. I choose our family and our business. Ashley, I want you out of my life and out of this company immediately." Ashley's response was pure venom. "You weak, pathetic fool. Your father is a dinosaur who will never understand modern business. You are throwing away millions of dollars because you cannot stand up to an old man who should have retired years ago." Thomas Sullivan nodded to Barbara, who called the Riverside Police Department. Officer Mike Rodriguez, who had worked security for several Morrison Construction community events, arrived within 15 minutes to arrest Ashley for embezzlement and fraud. As Ashley was handcuffed and read her rights, she screamed threats and accusations, blaming everyone except herself for the consequences of her criminal behavior. Her arrest was witnessed by several Morrison Construction employees who had stayed late, hoping to learn whether they would still have jobs tomorrow. After Ashley was taken away, Daniel broke down completely. The emotional weight of realizing how thoroughly he had been manipulated, how completely he had betrayed everything I had taught him, and how close he had come to destroying our family legacy was overwhelming. "Dad, I am so sorry. I do not know how to fix what I have done. I do not know how you can ever forgive me." My response reflected 35 years of loving my son despite his mistakes. "Daniel, forgiveness is not something you earn. It is something I choose to give because you are my son. But trust must be rebuilt through actions, not words. If you truly want to repair our relationship and learn to run this business properly, you will need to prove yourself through demonstrated change." Thomas Sullivan presented the legal documents that would restore my position as CEO while giving Daniel a path to eventually earn back his partnership. The agreement required Daniel to accept employee status for at least 1 year, during which he would work directly with me to learn the relationship-building skills he had never developed. The next morning brought immediate relief from the financial crisis. I personally called William Hayes, James Miller, and Margaret Thompson to confirm my return and guarantee continuity of service for their projects. All 3 clients expressed relief and renewed confidence in Morrison Construction. William Hayes was particularly supportive. "Reid, I knew there had to be more to this story. Daniel seemed like a good kid, but that woman was trouble from the first time I met her. I am glad you worked things out." Chuck Bradley and the other employees who had resigned agreed to return, expressing their loyalty to me and their willingness to give Daniel a second chance under my direct supervision. The construction crews were relieved to learn that their jobs were secure and that normal operations would resume immediately. The financial recovery was swift and complete. Barbara had tracked every dollar of Ashley's embezzlement, and the district attorney's office froze her personal accounts to recover stolen funds. The recovered money, combined with renewed client confidence, restored Morrison Construction's financial stability within 2 weeks. Ashley's criminal prosecution proceeded quickly. She pled guilty to multiple felony charges in exchange for a reduced sentence of 4 years in state prison and full restitution of stolen funds. Her gambling debts and personal financial irresponsibility became public record during the court proceedings, revealing the depth of her deception. Daniel filed for divorce while Ashley was awaiting trial, obtaining a restraining order that prevented her from contacting him or interfering with Morrison Construction's operations. The divorce was finalized within 6 months, with Ashley receiving no financial settlement due to her criminal conviction. The real healing began as Daniel and I worked together to rebuild our relationship and restore Morrison Construction's operations. I moved back into my company office and began teaching Daniel the skills he had never learned about building genuine client relationships. Daniel's transformation was gradual but genuine. He began attending client family events, community functions, and industry meetings where real business connections are built. He started treating employees as family members rather than production units, learning their names, their personal situations, and their professional goals. Most importantly, Daniel began understanding that success in construction, like success in family, is built on trust, respect, and genuine care for others. He learned to value long-term relationships over short-term profits, to prioritize integrity over efficiency, and to see business as a way of serving the community rather than extracting maximum value from it. 6 months after Ashley's arrest, Daniel had earned enough trust to begin handling client meetings independently, though always under my supervision. He was developing the interpersonal skills that are essential for maintaining the personal relationships that made Morrison Construction successful. The business grew stronger than ever. Word spread throughout the construction industry about how we had handled the crisis with integrity and professionalism. New clients began approaching us, attracted by our reputation for ethical business practices and long-term relationship building. I established the Martha Morrison Foundation, using the funds recovered from Ashley's embezzlement, plus matching contributions from Morrison Construction's profits. The foundation provides business education scholarships for young entrepreneurs, particularly women who want to start ethical, family-oriented businesses. Daniel became actively involved in the foundation, helping to select scholarship recipients and mentor young business owners. This work helped him understand Martha's vision for building something that would contribute to the community for generations beyond our lifetimes. 1 year after the crisis, Morrison Construction was thriving under our restored partnership. Daniel had proven himself worthy of increased responsibility and was beginning to handle major client relationships independently. Our business had grown by 28%, and we had hired 15 additional employees to handle increased demand. The personal healing between Daniel and me was more valuable than any financial recovery. We had rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of honesty, mutual respect, and shared commitment to ethical business practices. Daniel had learned that family loyalty means protecting each other from destructive influences, not enabling bad decisions. On the first anniversary of Ashley's arrest, I sat in my office looking at a framed photograph of Martha, feeling confident that she would be proud of how we had handled this crisis. We had proven that integrity and family loyalty are stronger than greed and manipulation. Daniel knocked on my office door, bringing coffee and the morning project reports. "Dad, I have been thinking about everything that happened, and I want you to know that I understand now why you and Mom built this business the way you did. It was never just about making money. It was about building relationships and contributing to something bigger than ourselves." I looked at my son, seeing the wisdom and maturity that had grown from his painful experience with Ashley's deception. "Daniel, the most important lesson you can learn is that success without integrity is not success at all. Your mother and I built Morrison Construction to last for generations, not just to maximize profits for a few years. The life lesson that emerged from this experience extends far beyond business or family relationships. We learned that trust is the most valuable asset in any relationship, that loyalty must be based on shared values rather than blind acceptance, and that sometimes losing everything is necessary to discover what truly matters. Ashley's betrayal taught us that modern efficiency and maximum profit are worthless if they are built on deception and manipulation. Daniel's choice, to prioritize his relationship with a dishonest wife over his family legacy, nearly destroyed everything we had built together. But Daniel's ultimate decision to choose family over greed, integrity over convenience, and long-term relationships over short-term gain proved that the values Martha and I had tried to teach him were stronger than any temporary manipulation. Today, Morrison Construction continues to grow under our restored partnership. Daniel has become a respected leader in the construction industry, known for his commitment to ethical business practices and community service. He has learned that true success comes from building something that will benefit others long after you are gone. The foundation that arose from our crisis is that business, like family, must be built on trust, respect, and genuine care for others. When those foundations are threatened by greed or deception, sometimes you must be willing to lose everything to protect what truly matters. As I conclude this story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever faced a situation where someone you trusted betrayed your loyalty for their personal gain? How did you handle the choice between enabling their destructive behavior or standing firm in your principles, even when it meant short-term loss or conflict? I would love to hear about your experiences with family loyalty, business ethics, or overcoming betrayal in the comments below. Your stories might help others who are facing similar challenges. If this story resonated with you, please like this video to help others find it. Subscribe to our channel for more stories about overcoming life's challenges with integrity and wisdom. And please share this story with anyone who might benefit from learning about the power of choosing principles over convenience. Thank you for listening to my story and for being part of a community that values truth, family, and ethical living. I hope that whatever challenges you are facing, you will have the courage to choose what is right over what is easy. Remember, the most valuable inheritance you can leave your children is not money or property, but the wisdom to build their lives on foundations of integrity, loyalty, and genuine service to others. May you find the strength to protect what truly matters, and the wisdom to know the difference between temporary setbacks and permanent values.